Welcome to Laid Back Law with your favorite lawyers from around the interwebs, discussing the most pressing of topics every Friday at noon Eastern Time.
All right, we are live. It's another week, and like I did last week, I want to do this at the jump of the show. That way, people who are the replay crew don't watch the whole thing, get an opportunity to see what is happening with the show, what's going on. In order to try to present things better and to help everybody involved, I'm asking for comments or suggestions for topics from the audience, and I'll also be generating topics. And this gives everybody a chance to look ahead of time, to possibly research, etc., all the people on the panel. And to do this, I'm utilizing X. It is a good universal free platform. Anybody can use it. And just a simple hashtag of LBL topics. And you can see that in the description wherever you are right now. And you can see, for example, this is one of the first topics that came in. Should judges be elected? And I will be trying to feature people's questions as they come throughout the show, because this is not just, the lawyer show, but it's your show. And I really would love to see everyone participate. And this is from Tickle Talk. I think it might be, if not the first one that came in, one of the first ones that came in. And it's very much appreciated. I will pull topics up throughout the show. Again, hashtag LBL topics. Send it in and see how simple that is. It could just be a short phrase. No, nothing complex. You don't have to send links to articles or anything else. You could just say, hey, can you talk about pardons? Hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do that? And I'll be able to get to all of them, but they definitely will influence the flow of the show. And I appreciate that. So in the spirit of that, today's show, and I think actually one of the lawyers on the panel used the hashtag himself. And that is going to be a subject for today's show, which is Jennifer Crumbley.
Oh, okay.
She's challenging her conviction, which I think the whole Crumbley case is bogus in my opinion, but obviously they were found guilty and sentenced and everything else. So Dave, you want to tell us what's going on?
Yeah, so this is Oakland County, which is actually where I reside and practice most of the time. And this particular case, if you guys don't know, this is the Oxford School pewer's parents that were charged criminally for the intentional wrongful acts of their minor child. And the theory that were used, there was two theories of homicide that was used. And the appellate attorneys for Jennifer Crumbley, who was convicted back in February, I believe, was or so a year ago now, they brought a motion for a new trial and to vacate the conviction. Mainly, I think, to preserve a lot of these issues for appellate review. But one of the most interesting things that came out of this motion was that there were proffer agreements made with two school employees. One, the counselor, the last person to see Ethan before the pewing, and the dean of students, the one that had the authority to remove him from the school that day. And those proffer agreements basically gave them blanket immunity for anything that they said on the stand, with sort of a wink and a nod, we're not going to prosecute you either, sort of approach. That information was never made available to the defense attorneys before or during the trial. It only came to light after the trial. So that's one of the bases for their motion to vacate the conviction and for a new trial. The other one is more concerning to me, which I brought up even at the point of the trial, was that Ethan, their son's journal entries and some of the text messages were allowed to be introduced. So essentially testimony from Ethan without the ability for the defendant to call Ethan as a witness, thereby, in my opinion, violating the confrontation clause. Those are the big two things that came out. There's also some other stuff, but they have a hearing next Friday, which I'm really excited to cover, to see kind of where this goes. So that's the update on that. I know, Kurt, you were following this case. You streamed it.
Yeah, also, of course, attacking just the fundamental underlying legal theory on the idea that there being no duty by the parents to the people that were harmed. And so, therefore, there can be no criminal liability. So the Court of Appeals has already ruled on that issue. There was an interlocutory appeal, but I imagine that's going to go to the Supreme Court of the state. So that issue is also, of course, live, even assuming like it fundamentally, can there be liability under this kind of set of facts is still a very live question. And incidentally, an increasingly interesting question, because we've already seen smattering of parents being held responsible for their children in other contexts, in other jurisdictions. It's happening. And so the creep is real. So I hope that the Supreme Court of the state will strongly consider whether or not this should be a thing.
Well, I don't.
Yeah.
It's funny because I don't think it's so new. For instance, like if you have a party of parents, like when parents used to have parties and kids would drink, and if someone got hurt or alcohol poisoning, the parents themselves could even be charged with a crime and would be civilly liable for the alcohol. So I think in most contexts, your children, you are responsible for the actions of your children. But in this particular criminal instance, in this murder instance, I think it's just a logical extension of the civil criminal liability, then the criminal liability with alcohol and other things. And now you get into the liability of parents not supervising their children properly.
It is also just inherently weird that you charge them as adults, which also just strikes me as odd. It's like, so they have responsibility to them as parents of children, minors, but we also want to charge them as adults. It seems incongruous.
You're right.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is the age of Ethan, as well as the fact that this was an intentional wrongful act. As sort of in my mind, as superseding to the parents' potential negligence or even gross negligence is a big issue. That is addressed, as well as the issue of the fact that they could find Jennifer guilty on two separate theories, and yet so they could half the jury could say she was guilty of improperly storing the firearm, and the other half of the jury could say that she was guilty of essentially not controlling her child. Those things don't have to line up, and they could still get a conviction. So that was one of the other issues.
Wow.
So it's a bad case all around.
Yeah.
What do you think the odds are that they'll get the new trial? You know the
they will not get a new trial. This was brought purely to preserve the issues that were either not addressed, newly discovered, or not properly addressed at trial, to go to the Court of Appeals. You have to preserve everything at the trial court level before you go to the Court of Appeals. This was a motion brought to just preserve it. They're not going to win, but it'll be interesting to see how the arguments go.
I mean, I was going to say, even when it gets to the Court of Appeals, none of those judges are going to be seen. They want to be seen as the judges who let Ethan Crumbley's parents go. So I mean that's probably going to be the going issue there too, because they had something pre-trial, I believe, and we were watching. And it's like, oh, they made really good arguments. The court's like, yeah, sorry, we're not going to prevent the trial from happening.
The Supreme Court,
the Court of Appeals decision saying that there could be liability, I felt very wanting, where they're like, yes, this can be a thing. It felt very half-assed and very not self-aware. So it is not encouraging. The court is taking this as seriously as they should.
Well,
I think the interlocutory appeal, the court was really looking at, well, we haven't heard all the facts. We haven't been presented with all the evidence. Let this trial develop, and then we'll listen to it, which is very typical of the Michigan Court of Appeals, the Michigan Supreme Court.
Some people in the chat seem to be confused with children being found liable. For instance, I know there was a case in, was it Iowa or something like that, where like a 7-year-old shot his friend with the parent's gun. The parents were charged. The parents were charged with manslaughter because of a 7-year-old. So yes, so I do understand there are differences with this case, but this is no crazy thing where if the parent can be seen to be negligent and leave their firearm unattended and their child kills someone, the parent generally is charged. So I do understand people are looking at this case in a different light because of the school shooting, but this is not something that's just out of the realm of possibility in our law. This is something that's been going on for years.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Nate. And I also agree with uncivil law, this idea that, you can be charged simultaneously as an adult, but also find the parents liable is somewhat absurd. And so hopefully the Supreme Court will, they're likely, I don't know, maybe MLS law or MLS, maybe you can sort of shine light on this. My guess is the Supreme Court's probably going to uphold this whole idea that you can, in fact, charge and prosecute the parents for this. That's not the issue. I think, but I hope going before the Supreme Court that they are going to look at that issue of, him being charged and tried as an adult and still holding the parents liable.
Right. So there is one Michigan Supreme Court case kind of sort of on point, and it was a gentleman who was convicted because similar ages, 7 and 6, I think, that Nate was talking about. One had shot the other child. And in that case, which is the only case in Michigan, they basically said that the children were so young they didn't recognize the danger of the firearm, the loaded sawed-off shotgun that was in the closet. But this particular case is different because Ethan was old enough to recognize the danger and the nature of his actions. And I think that is what the defense is hanging their hat on, saying once you have an individual, a child or some sort of ward under you that has this ability to distinguish and recognize the danger and then commit an intentional wrongful act, regardless of the danger, that's what severs that liability. And I think that's what the defense is pushing for.
Yeah, like the intentional acts of a third party traditionally breaks the chain of causation.
Right.
So it's like,
I think because it's the parent-child relationship, given that the child was still a minor, he was 15, I think, at the time, but they charged him as an adult. It's in all kinds of untested territory here in Michigan.
Yeah.
So interesting case. I'll be covering the hearing. I don't know, Kurt, are you covering the hearing too?
Yeah, I may well do because I want to see how these arguments develop. But I have a sneaking suspicion that nothing, if anything is going to happen, it's not going to happen before it gets to the state Supreme Court.
No, I'm right there with you.
All right. I realized that I showed the topic suggestion, and we never actually addressed what they were suggesting, which was the should judges be elected? And I mean, judges are elected in different places, different states. I'm sure that we're representing all kinds of different states here. Are they elected, in Texas and Utah? What do you guys?
They are elected in Texas. They are not elected in Virginia.
Okay.
They're not elected here, but they're elected in Nevada, I think.
They are elected in Ohio.
They are in Michigan, and I like it.
Yes, I do too.
We do not elect our judges or our prosecutors.
The king dictates.
Or our chief medical examiners or our sheriffs. No.
Fight the democracy.
No, we like to fire our. It's a government employee.
So
and we like to fire them when they do anything stupid.
Shelley in the chat says, I voted for a judge in Utah. You didn't. You voted to retain a judge in Utah. So that's what we vote for. Do you want to fire this person? So it's a little more similar to what Nick
so like an impeachment? Not an impeachment. Like a recall?
Yep. You can basically recall a judge here in Utah, but it is a hard thing to do. And so even though I don't like voting for judges for policy reasons, I can see the value in doing so.
Wasn't
New York, Nate?
Well, New York, they're voted in, but I remember, like, for the feds, the reason specifically they don't do it, vote them in, is because judges are supposed to be apolitical, and the political branch, even though they're appointed by politicians, they're the political branches of Congress and the president, and the judgeship is not supposed to be political. And if you put them up for a vote, then they're to the whims of the people. And there's been like a lot of surveys that have been done to show that when judges, let's say in Texas or even in New York, when they're up for re-election, the sentences become harsher. Instead of giving them 1 year, they give them 5 years because they want to show they're tough on crime. And then when they're past re-election, then the sentences and things become more reasonable because they're not for election. So they've been trying to figure out what works best for the situation. The states find that electing him is good and the feds find that appointments are good, well, they have no choice.
Okay, well, I want to hijack it and go one other direction, because it's something we've discussed a lot on America's Untold Stories, and we're torn on it. I personally like sheriffs being elected. However,
yeah.
police chiefs are appointed. And there's a problem that we see with that, because it's essentially the mayor has a strong arm person, like an enforcement wing, and that doesn't feel right. I'm curious your opinions. I would like to see the chief elected separately, but what do you guys think?
Well, also you have to remember that the power balance of these things is not uniform. So how much power these people have varies wildly. In some jurisdictions, the sheriff has a lot of power. In some jurisdictions, the sheriff has essentially no power. In some jurisdictions, like the mayor has a lot of power. In some jurisdictions, the mayor has essentially no power. It's all this town council. So there's like complete balance of these things. So it's hard to answer the question because they're not uniform things.
Well,
Okay, well, let's
I
an
love-
example.
The other thing I
Karen
was gonna-
Bass in LA.
Yeah,
I-
well,
There you go.
that's
I'll specify.
that becomes the. Oh, sorry, Danny.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for.
So when I ran in my jurisdiction for DA, the sheriff is also an elected position. I don't like that the election runs simultaneously with the DA. And then you have the mayor running on an opposite schedule. But anyway, I actually love the idea of having the two be separate, because what it does is it creates a little bit more balance in the police force in terms of policy making. One can't really move without the other one moving forward with them. And when there is a power imbalance, when the sheriff is taking too much control versus the mayor asserting control, it becomes very obvious to the public. So long as you have a good media who's willing to go and do the work and figure out who's at fault, right? Assigning blame to the appropriate department and assigning blame to the appropriate person who's in charge of that case or in charge of that investigation. So I think it works really well in theory, but I understand your frustration, Eric, because a lot of times it clogs up the person who's been elected. It clogs up really the will of the people, where the people are saying, no, we want to enforce the law, or we want more enforcement mechanisms on the street. We want to see more of this. And that's generally what most sheriffs run on, with the exception of my jurisdiction where they run on non-prosecution policies. So, this is, or non-enforcement policies. So it really depends on, what you prefer and whether or not you're seeing your policies go forward, and if the mayor is going to work together with the sheriff or not.
All right.
And I was going to say, I understand especially the frustration for people like Mark, where he lives in LA and, trying to affect your city government is basically impossible, even to the city council or any of the oversight that exists. Where, as for where I live, I live in a pretty small town. Like, I can affect local politics. They actually have to listen. They have to care what I say. So I there are times where I think that's a good idea, but I've generally speaking, I think for most people, they're kind of okay with it not being done, because it's one thing where like a city of 10,000 people might let their city council and mayor pick the police chief. But, for your like county governance, you might have just like 3 people that get, your county commissioners or whoever on a board. I don't want them picking the sheriff. I do like how the sheriff is elected, but also I think that's really, I think that just becomes an issue of that just goes back to the traditional structures, the way your state set it up. But
All right.
I have an idea. The city of Detroit has a Detroit Police Commission. It's made up of, I think it's 5 district-based representatives, and then I think it's 3 or 4 at large. So the whole city. They have policy decision ability, but they don't necessarily have appointment of police chief. But it would be nice for a body like that they're basically just citizenry. They're not police or anything like that. Their job is to be civilian oversight of the police and to have the appointment ability for the chief rather than the mayor. And then you take the police chief sort of out of politics, but they're also not being directly appointed by the mayor.
Okay.
That might be a
not bad.
decent idea.
And the
Could be the
commission,
same
where do
thing
they
with
come from?
judges.
Do they get elected? The people in that commission?
Yeah, they do. Actually, I got a buddy of mine is one of them, and he's just sort of a regular guy that decided to run one day and got elected. And that's all he does is, I mean, for politics wise, he's not like doing anything else, but he sits on the police commission and they have meetings every other day, and they help institute policy and push the police with regard to whatever new thing that they're doing. The big issue right now is facial recognition. But yeah, he lives in the city and does his thing.
All right, that's not a bad idea. And part of the reason I brought it up is I've had Dr. Michael Wood on multiple times. He was a Baltimore cop who came out during, I think it was Freddie Gray time frame. Used to be on Young Turks. He's kind of shifted a lot, but his PhD was doing research into the police stats everywhere, and he was saying that the numbers bear out statistically about violence and things like that it happens less frequently under sheriffs than it does under chiefs. Now, this could be a factor too of chiefs tend to be large cities and these things happen, but I do think that was an interesting concept. I'm going to move on to CNN defamation suit. I believe Nick Starro, you've been covering that. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going to lead off with Nick on that. What's going on with the CNN?
Oh, CNN defamation suit has been very, very enlightening to cover, because this Zachary Young was a defense contractor, and then during the Afghan withdrawal, everything erupted into chaos, and some of the companies who had employees in Afghanistan wanted people out. He offered his services to these companies, got people out, I believe 24 women and children. And then simultaneously, CNN decided to do a piece on human trafficking. And they had, in a 5-minute segment, they had 2 or 3 victims of black market operators and human traffickers. And then all of a sudden they put Zachary Young on there, who did not do any human trafficking. He solely worked with businesses, sponsors, so to speak. So, and CNN tried then, 4 months later, they made a retraction that we didn't mean to imply that Zachary Young was this black market operator, but for Zachary Young, too late. So he sued them for defamation. And the trial concluded about a few days ago with Zachary Young getting $5 million in lost wages and damages. And then CNN settled for the punitive damages for an undisclosed amount of tens of millions.
Well, let me just say that it's probably some of that result could be Jim Acosta at midnight.
Yes.
They're out of money. They're moving people around. I'm saying it could be reflective of that lawsuit. What do you guys think?
Well,
I think CNN sucks.
It's probably just an example of another symptom building and building up on them. I mean, yeah, CNN's got a lot of issues. They're restructuring to more digital format. It's like, because now that they lost, the election's over and the Orange Man won. Like, I thought they would love this because now they can do more panic and screaming and crying content, but they realize it's not selling, I guess.
They did a digital content before. Remember, they had the whole CNN. I forgot the name of it. Even it was so short-lived that they just burned down and tossed away. So how's that digital content going to work now?
Well, I feel like CNN is like the Disney of news stations. They don't really know what they want to be, what they want to do. They're just throwing everything out there, trying to appease everybody, and they're going down in flames.
That's the interesting part in this trial, because they got to depose the senior vice president of CNN. They got to depose 2 new. Jake Tapper was deposed, and oh my God, it was bad. And then they deposed Alex Marquardt, whatever his name is, also one of these star anchors, and he was even more bad on deposition and on the stand. And what was most revealing is the inner workings, because it is not that common that a big news organization gets past being sued and then gets past discovery. And now they have to talk. They have to show all the inner emails, all the inner text messages, and how everything built up in that. And the attorney, Mr. I want to say, sorry, Mr. Friedman, who was the main attorney for Zachary Young. That's some good lawyering. And Saturday, 7 p.m. on my channel, I have an exclusive interview with Mr. Friedman. He's a New York-based attorney. And
it's weird because that name sounds Jewish. You don't normally hear of Jewish lawyers from New York. So
no,
Very
it's really
unusual.
uncommon. No, but I mean, the way because these CNN journalists are not used to people asking that extra question. They are used to just make a vague remark and get away with it. No, not in depositions. Oh, what did you mean by that, Mr. Marquardt? And
it looks like we lost signal. that was the CNN trademark. Oh, it looks like we lost signal. I'm just so happy to see them gone. Jim Acosta, especially. Good riddance. It was sad to lose, the worst journalist of the year, Don Lemon, worst journalist of the year. So, they
hired Seltzer back.
I mean, they get what they deserve. I'm very happy to see CNN finally getting its comeuppance. The next, and they need to be careful, is MSNBC and Fox. They really, really need to actually cite their sources, actually do the groundwork, actually do some investigative journalism, and not, engage in propaganda spreading, because otherwise they will get nailed too.
Fox already got nailed. Fox has to pay what, $700 million for their lies. But MSNBC, and we covered the MSNBC one, right? We covered the NBC where they get
we covered the MSNBC one.
Yeah,
ABC settled
you guys
for
think that
million with Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think it's a matter of doing more research. The discovery revealed that this was willful. This is not actual malice in the sense of being reckless in their reporting or knowledge of the falsity. This was a planned ambush on Zachary Young because they hate him. And private DMs, they refer to him as, we're going to get that, that mother after. Yeah. Like,
do you think this is a product of
that's why the punitive was so bad.
Yeah, they need
do you think this is a product of the Rachel Maddow decision, where literally doesn't mean literally because she's an opinion show, so now everyone thought that they had license to spread their opinions?
But that wasn't the first time that was done.
Tucker
Carlson had the same exact opinion for Rachel Maddow, went for Tucker Carlson. So they've always had this.
Yeah, and in this trial,
but I mean,
what was the definition of black market? And every CNN employee, that means an unregulated market. And you go, what? No, an unregulated market.
My markets are usually extremely regulated. That's why they're not legal.
What is
wait? But we don't use dictionaries at CNN. What? It was so bad. And I cut out everything in highlights and videos, not just streams, because a large portion of my audience likes the highlights. And I have highlights. I have so much highlights for you. The depositions are so bad.
Awesome. All right. Well, cool. Back to the well with some LBL topics here. Steve Lewis, Jack Prong Air, or at Jack Prong Air, said, "Can Sharia law be kept out of American law?"
Of course.
I think I know what this guy's talking about, because there are Sharia courts and things that function in America, but it's people in contractual situations and societal issues.
Aren't there Jewish courts as well?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like Joe, there are,
There's
courts that will address contractual and cultural issues according to your own societal standards and laws. And like, for example, there are,
faith-based law.
Yeah, faith-based laws,
How about
Jewish
LDS?
Arbitrators, Islamic arbitrators. But those are done separately and entirely out of the way, and it's not like
that's what the question is.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone, because the only way you ever have to submit to a faith-based legal system, which potentially criminal is correct. We call them a bet din, which is Hebrew for court, and they will It's an arbitration, which is the parties both have to agree to appear to. And there are different societal type of ways of weaponizing that to compel someone who's religious to actually appear and submit to that particular court system in lieu of an American court system. But as far as I don't think that's what the question's really about, because if people don't refuse to submit to, if someone's a Muslim, they refuse to submit to Sharia law. So that's their own thing. But I think that question is more about, I think it's more a matter of not, of a question of how we keep it out of invading into our legal system, not some separate legal system. You know what I'm saying? Not some separate court system, but how.
I want to hear from Michigan. I want to hear from Michigan because, from what I understand, there seems to be a pretty heavy representation of folks who may be interested there. Dave, is there any issues or thoughts about this from your neck of the woods?
No, there's always sort of radical far out there groups that try to like promote something, but it's not going anywhere. For example, it does creep in though. I do a lot of family law and divorce, and sometimes the sort of the dowry or the gift exchanges, customs in different religions have a play in it. The other thing too is, people that don't recognize divorce as part of the religion sometimes has a play into it, but it doesn't trump the law. The law is the law, and you just, if there's a contractual obligation within it, that's fine. We'll deal with it. There's nothing happening here. Everyone got scared in Dearborn, Michigan, which is sort of like, we call it like Little Middle East here, when the majority of the city council became Muslim and were elected, and everyone was, nervous. They're going to introduce Sharia law. None of that's happened. They can't. It would violate so many constitutional issues.
Yeah. And I guess more of what I was saying is just when people, because you hear these stories of like, oh my gosh, people are like, I can't believe there's Sharia courts. And it's like, okay, wait. And so you have to say, look, it's not a court like you get arrested for theft and the judge is like, all right, hold on, let me get this machete out of the fire if we can get your hand off. It's nothing like that.
They don't have any real power. I mean, they can't. They can choose whether or not to recognize a divorce for religious reasons, but it has no impact on legal divorce.
Well, you can agree to it as like a binding arbitration.
Well, so for example, like if there's dowry involved in a lot of Muslim marriages and things like that, those can be honored and dealt with in the family law court. There was a opposing party who didn't want to sign the judgment of divorce as a consensual one because of his religious beliefs, and so he essentially pled no contest to the divorce. And that's allowed to happen. So there's workarounds, but it doesn't trump. Again, it doesn't trump the law.
I had a case just like that where we had to seek an annulment because one of the parties wouldn't consent as part of their religious tenets. But yeah, I mean, to say they don't have powers is to ignore the actual realities of some of these communities. They definitely do, but do they have any legal bearing on the rest of us? No. The answer is no.
All I'm saying is that all the Orthodox courts in the world can have all their judgments they want on me, and I just don't care.
Yeah.
So fair enough. Okay, Danny, I don't know if you've covered this or not, but have you looked into the birthright citizenship issue that's going on right now? We've got an executive order, and not surprisingly, a court immediately has jumped in. Might be a fun topic to chat about.
So Joe's ripborn and ready to go. I don't want to take it from Joe, but I will say I was raised on border states. I've been raised with this issue since I was a kid, and birthright citizenship has never and will never make sense to me, or it shouldn't make sense to most attorneys. It's rather absurd. And I gave the example of my husband's a Korean citizen. I'm an American citizen. Both jurisdictions can assert citizenship. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Authority over our child. Okay. So my child can be a Korean citizen and an American citizen until they turn the age 18, at which time they need to choose. Are they going to be American or are they going to be Korean? You can't choose both.
Oh, they can't.
So,
I thought there were some dual citizens out there who, especially if
let's say
your child worked half in Korea and here.
I would be really shocked to hear that because South Korea has mandatory military service. That may be the case for women, but certainly not for men, because you have to pledge allegiance. You have to pledge your allegiance to one country or the other. And you have to renounce your interest in one or the other, typically speaking. So let's say that me and my husband moved to Italy for work and I give birth in Italy. Is my baby now Italian, and can the Italian courts and the Italian jurisdiction assert its jurisdiction over my baby and say that it is an Italian citizen? No, that would be absurd. In any other legal context, if you put the same scenario in any other context, everyone would say, no, that's absurd. But for whatever reason, when it comes to America, they say, yep, if you are born here, then you are a citizen. The Constitution, if you are using statutory construction properly and correctly, you have to read the entire amendment in its entirety. And you're asking me to ignore the second part of that line that says and. So it's born or naturalized, comma, and under the jurisdiction, or what is it?
Subject to the jurisdiction
Subject to the
thereof.
jurisdiction thereof. If you want me to ignore the subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that would be absurd. And the law does not accept such.
Well, not so much as
absurdities,
ignoring it,
in
as
my
trying to figure out
opinion.
exactly what does that mean. What does it mean
Yeah.
to be subject to jurisdiction thereof? That's the game.
Well, my baby certainly would not be subject to the jurisdiction of Italy.
Well, Amanda Knox could disagree with that argument.
So you may become subject to the jurisdiction thereof as a non-citizen, but Amanda Knox didn't just become an Italian citizen.
No, I
because
agree.
she became
I
subject
agree
to
with
the
that.
Oh,
jurisdiction.
we'd be in
That's where-
trouble if we were
Yes.
subject to the jurisdiction of England and talking out loud. We'd probably all be locked up.
Mhm.
Well, I
Right.
mean, if I
So
go
that's why you
go
need-
visit
you
any
need
country in the
both.
world, I'm subject to the
let's say-
jurisdiction of their laws,
You need both.
You
Yeah,
can
you're
all
right.
be Swedish
right?
if you just be
Hence
born
the
here.
and, right?
Well-
You can be naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, or you can be born and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But the and is the conjunctive. And that's where people are missing that really important conjunctive word there.
And if
Like,
people,
again, I don't think that's the problem. I think we're just disagreeing about exactly what does it mean to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
I
Well, I-
agree.
That's the thing.
well, for people who are looking at it, and I don't know how far Joe went. Into
It's
this.
not Jews solely. It's jus soli.
Just,
it-
yes, just
It's a Latin phrase.
yes, yes,
And it's
It's not
spelled
just-
JUSSOLI. Jus soli.
it's
which
Latin,
means the
folks.
ju-
Here's my concern is
The
that it's going
juice
to get
is
up to
very
the Supreme
loose.
Court, and we don't have a lot of good originalists to look into the meaning of those phrases and to look into the way in which common law had applied it and British law had applied those terms prior to it being written into the Constitution. So I would really like to see that argument. I would like to see this go to the Supreme Court. I do think that it's a lazy argument to say, nope, this is how we've always done it. This is how we're
Yes.
going to keep doing it because it's bureaucratically simple and easy to apply in this case.
Well, we have some things like wet foot, dry foot with Cuba. I think that come
didn't
out
the
of
Supreme
came
Court-
out of some of this,
On
right?
that, I'll tell you, Danny, that I can forward to you a link from a Texas law student. I don't remember her first name. Her last name is Swearer, though. That name stuck out.
Amy Swearer.
Amy Swearer. She wrote a very comprehensive analysis as to whether or not birthright citizenship simply means being born and not be the limitation that Danny's referring to, subject to the jurisdiction, is currently by the left, and frankly a lot of mainstream, most of us have been interpreting it this way for the longest time, as being a very narrow class of people, specifically as to who it's excluding from becoming a citizen upon being born on our soil, and that would be children of ambassadors and dignitaries. And that because those an ambassador and a dignitary who's visiting from another country is not subject to the jurisdiction of this country, so their children would be the excluded people by that clause, and that's obviously a very limited exclusion. You're talking probably fewer than like 500 people ever born, or 1,000 people ever born. This does not just apply to legal aliens, by the way. This attack also applies to someone who's visiting here from France. And
I'm
come
here to work.
But
I
there's
have
an
a
entire
legal
industry of
visa.
that.
I'm here legally. But the question is does that mean that my child is automatically Italian? Or does the United States and South Korea make more sense? Wouldn't that be the child's first jurisdictional question? I think it's also important to note that even though you obtain citizenship at birth, some form of citizenship, whatever your country may be, It doesn't entitle you to all the same rights as an adult citizen would have. And that's
but Danny, I'll
yeah,
push
go
back
ahead.
respectfully. And I'm on your side in this argument, by the way. But
Please push
the
back.
way you're framing it, you're basically implying that they could at least have some sort of choice to.
No, I'm saying they don't.
Jurisdiction they have.
I'm saying they don't. I'm saying it would depend on the jurisdiction of the parent.
And you're saying just because they're visiting in Italy, they would not have the ability to be an Italian.
Correct.
But that's under Italian law, not U.S. law. U.S. law says that if from what I remember reading, I haven't looked at it in a bit, that if you're born here, then you have U.S. citizenship, and it doesn't matter with certain exclusions. But it doesn't matter.
One of those exclusions was for Native Americans. The Supreme Court has previously ruled that Native Americans did not obtain citizenship by birth. That was done by statute, where Native Americans were given birthright
What about
citizenship.
Guam and
they're done by
American
statute
Samoa too. And well, I'm just saying.
Well, not so much in American Samoa.
American Samoa is still
they're American nationals.
They get dissed.
Yeah, they're American nationals.
So,
but I want to.
But those are all by statute too.
I'll tell you why Trump is right, though. I have a slightly different perspective here as to why Trump is right, along the lines of what Danny's saying for sure. But I definitely have. I think his legal team is correct. And just because we haven't been interpreting it that way for the last several decades, that doesn't mean our interpretation has been correct. The same way our interpretation of pardons has arguably been flawed as well, and been a misapplication of what the law actually is that just becomes accepted as like, well, that's what the law is, even if that's not what the law says. And I think Trump, what he's doing here is redirecting as to what the law is. And the analysis that Amy Swearer made, I think, is a very sound analysis, whether you're a originalist, you're a textualist, unless you're the type of person who looks at the Constitution as a living, breathing document, you want to say that the definition that's been embraced over the last several decades has now become the definition, which there are some legal scholars who would try to take that approach. But if you look at the original intent, we all know that the original intent was to overturn Dred Scott and to say that freed slaves are indeed American citizens, and you can't use your racist tendencies to try to keep them from attaining full American citizenship. That was the objective specifically for that class of people. That was, and they were afraid that people would, and the thought process was they have no allegiance to anyone else. You can't say that they're tied into some place that they come from 5 generations ago in Africa, and that's a basis to, then we can send them back there, or that's where their country of origin is. No, we have to say that this entire class of people here are people who have full American citizenship, and that was the objective there. Then and when you look at Wong Kim Ark, which I'm sure is the Supreme Court case that a lot of you are and the left are going to look to, there's a very big distinction between Wong Kim Ark and some illegal who crosses the border. In fact, there are several distinctions between Wong Kim Ark and specifically Wong Kim Ark. Those of you who are unfamiliar with that case, it's a case from 1898, where you had a kid who was born a few years after the 14th Amendment was passed, and he was obviously he was of Chinese. His parents were Chinese American people who were permanently domiciled in the United States. And when Wong left the country and then went to China and returned, they didn't want to give him admission. And this is in the 1890s. He's born like 1871. The 14th Amendment is passed in 1866. He's born 1871. In the mid 1890s, he goes to China. When he returns, they say, "You're not American citizen. You can't come here." He says, "Yes, I am." Supreme Court said his parents are permanently domiciled here, and accordingly, as we interpret the 14th Amendment, he is an American citizen. He's entitled to those full rights and privileges. And that's what the left keeps pushing to and say, see, Wong Kim Ark, this decided 130 years ago. What?
Green card holders.
Yes, well, they weren't green card
holders.
holders.
They
were not green. They were much more than green card holders.
You're right, though.
To say something
Joe's right. Sorry.
Just give me 30 more seconds, and I know I've been going for a while, but I'll land my plane in just 30 more seconds. The only reason that Wong Kim Ark's parents were not citizens was because at the time there was a statute that precluded any Chinese person from
That's right.
from naturalizing and becoming a citizen. In every other respect, if they were not Chinese, they would have been citizens. That's what the term permanent domicile meant in the context of that case. But they really were as much as citizens as they could be, and that they were withheld from they were citizens in everything but name. And they would have been citizens, but for the fact that there was a racist law which said no Chinese people can ever be naturalized as a citizen here. So in that sense, to compare them to say that a legal alien is like Wong Kim Ark, when the illegal alien's parents are not in any way citizens. In fact, they're actually breaking the law and showing a lack of allegiance to the United States just by virtue of breaking the law to get in here. And compare that to the perfectly lawful parents of Wong Kim Ark is a ridiculously flawed analysis.
I think you're not giving enough credit here to
Thank
the
you.
Chinese Exclusion Act, to be quite
Thank
honest.
you, Joe. And
because-
can you send me that research? I really want to hear that.
Yeah,
I
I'll
want
take
to
it
read
as well.
that.
'cause I think
Okay,
it's
sorry,
just-
go
put it-
ahead,
Put it in
Kurt.
the X thread. But I was just saying, I don't think you're giving enough credit to the Chinese Exclusion Act, because Congress can choose the uniform rules for naturalization, and they're choosing who to allow in the country. And although their motivations may not be the best, I would argue the Chinese Exclusion Act was legal in so much as they're choosing, for whatever their reasons are, not to allow Chinese people to become U.S. nationals. That's their
Right, but
prerogative.
Kurt, you're forgetting that there were slaves here, Chinese slaves who were brought here, and they had children, and those children were also excluded, even though the same exact scenario, if black, they were included. That's what Joe's talking about, and that's why it's racist, and that's why it would be illegal.
Everybody,
if we're
hold on.
looking
Nate
to the
wants to say
intent,
something. I want to get Nate in there because it's been quite a long time. He tried to talk and he kind of got overrun.
Right.
Oh no. I was listening to the conversation. I'm going to disagree with the panel here because I think the subject to the jurisdiction they're in. If you think about it in terms of diplomats, if a diplomat commits any crime, the diplomat is not subject to any jurisdiction of the United States. If they commit a crime, murder, or whatever, they get sent back to their home country. They cannot be prosecuted. They can't even be held civilly liable, right? That's the diplomatic thing. So that's why when it comes to diplomats, they are absolutely not, and neither are their children are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, when it comes to slaves were actually stateless. Essentially, before the 14th Amendment, they were essentially stateless people. They were here, they had no allegiance to anywhere else. So the 14th Amendment essentially said these people who are now stateless now are citizens of both the country and the state they reside. So when it comes to illegal aliens, it comes down this subject to the jurisdiction when they're here illegally. If they commit a crime, if they commit this is what generally was thought of with saying subject to that jurisdiction. Are you subject to all the laws and everything? And the other side would say, yes, these people are subject to the jurisdiction, are forced to do everything, unlike diplomats. So that's why they would say, yes, even if you're here illegally and you have a baby, you are subject to this jurisdiction, and therefore your children are U.S. citizens based on that reasoning. But I understand that may be controversial, but that's generally the way it's looked at.
But Nate,
and I agree with Nate, which is that's how it reads, and that's how it should be interpreted based off of how it reads, if you ask me. Now, with the case that Joe was just citing, if you have to look to the intent of the parents, that's a very hard thing to say, because if you want to argue that an illegal alien coming over that happens to give birth here didn't intend to stay here, I think you have a very tricky case in front of you.
No.
I don't know if it's just their intent to stay.
I would say the opposite.
No.
I would say the burden's on them to prove that they do intend to stay here, rather because we start with the assumption that before they cross the border, they're definitely not American. They're not in no way they have American privilege, and they could be just passing through on the way to Canada. I mean, we don't even know. You don't even know when someone comes in here what their objective is, if they have intention of being here.
They are still subject to the jurisdiction they just came from. They don't automatically change citizenship just because they come here to the United States. Just like I don't become Italian just because I moved to Italy, people. And that's the thing, Nate, what you were just talking about before. You said, okay, well, this was designed for people who were stateless. I agree with you. If you're stateless, then hey, you're up for grabs. Any jurisdiction can go ahead and say, yeah, you can be a part of us. I have no problem with that. But I think it's absurd, the idea that if I were to, let's say, visit South Korea or North Korea for funsies, which I can't do, but let's say I did that and I was pregnant and I gave birth, Kim Jong-un, I guarantee you, would love to assert jurisdiction over my child and say it's a North Korean child. Okay. that doesn't mean that it makes
Mhm.
sense. That's the type of legal logic that we're applying in this case. If that's the logic we're applying, is that if you're born here, you get to stay here, you become an automatic citizen. That doesn't make sense.
But that leaves out the part. Are you subject to the jurisdiction thereof? And you can't tell me someone who's born here who is not a diplomat is not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Any crimes those parents commit, yes, they are not citizens. But if the child is born and they're subject to the so you would have to amend that part of the Constitution because they are.
No, they would be
you
subject
don't
to
have
the
to amend
jurisdiction
it.
of their parents.
There's
So
no-
if their parents are Mexican and they are still Mexican when the child is born, then the child is Mexican. That's how it works
All right,
in
so-
almost
so
every other country.
So if you're here in the middle of the United States, your parents are Mexican,
Yes.
they commit a crime,
Yes.
they're not being shipped back to Mexico to serve that. They're under the jurisdiction that even though they're here illegally.
Correct.
And I think that's the tension here. Whether you're subject to the laws of the country that you're in, and
But the child would be sent back to Mexico.
But the argument against that, I still think,
Should
goes
be
back to
sent
the
back.
Native Americans, because the problem is with Native Americans, the Supreme Court has said that they were not included within the 14th Amendment natural birth citizenship.
Mhm.
They clearly are domiciled in the United States.
And
They've
here-
been here, for 20,000 years.
Well, they're in their own nation, technically.
Well, that's the thing. But
Precisely,
but we're talking about just soli, right? We're talking about they're born on the soil.
Yes.
So it's like, are these places within the borders of the United States or aren't they?
Just
I mean,
soli.
so
that's
just-
a lot, though. That's a lot to ask. Reservations
No,
they are.
look,
but
I'm just saying.
a whole
Look,
bunch of
the
asterisks.
thing is, if Native Americans don't get birthright citizenship from the 14th Amendment, even though they're born here,
So that's
because they have allegiance to their tribe, and so their allegiance is not to the United States, then the idea of allegiance becomes more the thing rather than the idea of domicile becoming the thing, which actually is an
It's
argument in
supportive
support of
of
Trump's
Trump.
idea.
Yeah,
I
it was
think
support of Trump's
Trump's
idea.
perspective.
So
I think the
question,
turning
anybody
point with
here-
the Native Americans is that the sovereign nation of the tribes and tribal land. I think that's the turning point.
So anybody who goes on vacation here in America and oh my God, she has a baby while they're here from any country, currently you're saying that boom, that's a citizen because baby.
No, that's how they're treated right now. That's how they're treated right now. Yes.
It shouldn't have been happening. That's
The Native American thing didn't turn on whether they were born on tribal land, though. It didn't matter where they were born within the United States. They could have been visiting New York, and it wouldn't have mattered.
So here's the flaw with the whole jus soli analysis, and this is why a lot of people think that there were problems with Wong Kim Ark, because you need to consider something for a second. There was a legal fiction that was employed back in the 1860s when it came to viewing ambassadors. That legal fiction is that there is this, that they are not standing on American soil by dint of having servitude to their particular home native country. This very soil they are standing on, for the moment that they're standing on it, belongs to the country of their origin. So if you had a meeting in the United Nations, not that there was United Nations in 1860, but if there was a meeting of a Polish dignitary and a French dignitary and an Austrian dignitary, a Prussian, they would each be standing on different, and they're standing in New York, they would each be standing on their own native soil. If that is the case, you would not even need to have the last 6 words of subject to the jurisdiction, because they wouldn't fulfill the first portion. They're not born on native soil because the soil beneath their feet is not America, even if it's in New York or in California, whatever. It's not in America.
It must be America, because we can always expel the diplomat. If they weren't in America, we can expel them.
It's not considered American soil. And when you say subject to the jurisdiction,
I don't
Nate,
think that's true.
The question is, does that mean completely subject to the jurisdiction, or does it mean simply in any way, shape, or form subject to the jurisdiction? Because if it really just means the very loose definition that Nate and many others, Nate's not alone in this.
Oh no,
the majority of people agree with what he's saying. But if it really, the real argument here is, does it mean subject exclusively to the jurisdiction of the United States, or are they also subject to the jurisdiction of another country? So
That's the
Danny and I Danny and I are, and our perspective are basically saying that means you have to be exclusively subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And Nate is saying if there's any, and not Nate alone, this is something which is probably currently the majority opinion.
This is the law. What I'm saying
This is
is
the
way
current
the
law.
law has been applied, certainly.
Yeah.
It's definitely,
Yeah.
it's not, I wouldn't say it's the law. I'd say the way the law has been applied for decades, for many decades, going back
Right.
before you were born. Is that if there's any jurisdiction at all by the United States, but that perspective and the flaw in that perspective of any jurisdiction at all is that even a foreign dignitary has there's some sort of jurisdiction over them. You're allowed to evict them. There's some sort of power that the United States of America has over even a foreign dignitary.
All
So
right, riddle me this so I can get back. I can help me
I don't
understand
know.
further. The Italian couple who's here on vacation, they have a child.
Mhm.
Now, is this, and then they go back to Italy with their child and they live.
Yeah.
Now, is the child no longer an Italian citizen, or is the child both?
No.
Well, technically,
It
No,
it's
I'm
depends
just-
on the. It
No,
depends
the-
on what Italian law says.
Yeah.
They
It's the
can-
same. My wife's daughter. My wife is Swedish. My wife's daughter was born in Sweden, but my wife was also a U.S. citizen, and so was her husband at the time. And she got a polka dotted birth certificate from the U.S. claiming she was a U.S. citizen, even though she was born in Sweden. And she also got dual Swedish citizenship. It
Yeah.
depends on the host nation, what the host nation law says.
Well, can I say one thing about
Who
that? Is
collects
that,
taxes?
that's a citizen through statute, though, because there's a statute that says if both one or two of your parents are citizens and you're a citizen from the United States. So that's different than I think natural born citizen, which I think they're trying to discuss now.
Right, but what I was trying to say is that she was born in Sweden and she was naturalized in the U.S. under
Sweden
under the
can-
statutory thing.
But
But Sweden also accepted her citizenship, so
Mhm.
it depends on the host country what
Yeah.
they wanted.
I
Some
would like
countries
to,
make you choose.
I would like to ask the panel, what about, let's say, a Palestinian? Because there's really no Palestinian state, so they're essentially, technically, they're stateless. And I understand the world, the whatever, they started to recognize them, but before they recognized them, they were essentially stateless. Palestinian couple comes here, has a baby. Is that baby now a U.S.
Well, what
citizen?
passport are they traveling here under?
Oh, good question.
Well, let's say they got here illegally. There is no passport.
Uh-huh.
There is
Oh,
no
the
passport.
baby is
but
Palestinian.
they are stateless, though. They are stateless.
No, the baby's Palestinian.
But I'm saying
They're
there's
not
no
stateless.
Palestinian.
United
They're
States doesn't
still
recognize
Palestinian.
Palestine.
If they were
There is
Palestinian
Palestinian.
citizens before, just because they come here doesn't make them no longer Palestinian citizens.
Well,
So
no, I'm
if
saying
they're
there's
still
no state.
Palestinian citizens.
Well, I thought
and
Gaza.
the baby's
I
here,
thought
No,
Yeah,
they're
no,
Palestinian.
all right, you saying Palestinian citizen, but if
The
there
United
is
States
no,
does not recognize Palestine.
yeah,
They
so
can't
there is no
possibly be
Palestine,
Palestinian
so you
citizens
can't be a
as far as the US is
Palestinian citizen.
concerned.
There is no Palestine. So in the situation where they have no state, for instance, like I'll give a better example. In the Dominican Republic,
Does the U.S. consider them
in the
Israeli?
Dominican Republic, there were people from Haiti who had dual citizenship. They were
Okay.
Dominicans and Haitians. So the Dominican Supreme Court ruled that everyone who was born who has Haitian background, essentially all black people who are from Haiti, are now stateless. They are not Dominican citizens. They are not citizens.
If they're
but
stateless, then we can assert jurisdiction.
So now both those people come to the United States, have a baby illegally. They would essentially, now that child would be, under your guys' interpretation, would be a U.S. citizen, full out, because they're stateless.
Right.
Okay.
I agree with that interpretation of the law.
Was
I agree
stateless
with that.
written
I think
into
that
the
that's
amendment?
appropriate. And I think
There's
that
no-
makes
there's
sense,
no logic to it.
especially.
But that would
Go ahead.
no, I said because that would also apply to Palestinians who we don't so any place we don't recognize them having a state or being stateless, that this would apply to them.
If they
I mean,
somehow
Well,
get
if we
here
don't
legally,
recognize the
yeah.
state, that doesn't mean they're not of a state, though.
I don't
I
know.
mean,
I don't know if
like,
that
the-
means
we didn't
statement.
recognize democratic.
The Palestine government
Yeah.
and the authority considers themselves a proper country,
Mhm.
so they have Palestine passports.
What does Israel consider people born in Palestine to be? Do they consider them to be Israeli?
No.
No,
No,
I'm genuinely
no, no,
asking.
no.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
I'm
know
sure
the
they
course of
consider
Israeli law.
Palestinian because they gave
think now-
Gaza. Who did they give Gaza to? I'm just saying, Israel pulled out. They said, "Here you go, Gaza. Here's West Bank."
Yeah.
Who did they give it to? You got to have a recipient. So
Yeah.
there's some sort of thing there, state something, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of people are screaming about the author of the 14th Amendment, which was Senator Howard, who said
Mhm.
obviously it doesn't apply to to aliens who are visiting here or come in here illegally. From originalist perspective, it certainly doesn't apply to them. And I would basically say that you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States if at any moment that individual could theoretically be recalled by their country and drafted. Man or woman, because some countries will draft women. If they can be drafted, you're in that case, you're not subject to the jurisdiction. And they're not even submitting themselves to the jurisdiction. They're not even willfully submitting themselves to the jurisdiction of the United States. And you want to know how they're not submitting themselves? Because when they step across the country, they're breaking our laws. If you're submitting yourself to jurisdiction, you're saying, I will follow the laws of this country. By virtue of the fact that they are illegal aliens, they are not submitting to the jurisdiction and saying, I'll follow all the laws of this country.
Every bank robber is not subject
mean-
to the jurisdiction because he's breaking the law.
They're rejecting. No, what I'm saying is they're rejecting the jurisdiction of the United States and saying, I don't need to follow your laws. Now, they happen to have American citizenship based on other bases in most cases.
Oh,
Now,
we're going to get into
Joe
sovereign
just gave the
citizens
best
thing.
We're not
argument
talking about
for
stripping.
sovereign citizens.
We're not.
Yes.
No, we're not stripping them.
While we're at it, let's talk about
they're
whether the
not
14th
being-
Amendment was
Again-
properly ratified or not. That'll be fun.
There's a
But
difference
hold
between
on.
stripping
Joe's
someone of-
absolutely right. There has to be another legal basis, and that is born or naturalized, comma, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I don't know why people don't read the whole thing as the whole thing. Like there are two prerequisites. You must have either or. You must be either born here or naturalized here, and be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. That's why the and matters. That's why the whole phrasing context matters. And Joe, you're absolutely right. I mean, just
Is
because
it
you
possible to
subject,
be naturalized but not be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States?
No, actually, when you get naturalized, you have to.
Not
it's-
under
Yeah, that's
our
like
law.
so. This is
Not-
so
not
the,
under
so
our
the clause only
statutory
applies
law.
to one half of it.
What does that
But
mean?
just like at the time the 14th Amendment passed, they had to word it this way because there were the issues of truly these people had no state. And the other thing, David, you're making the argument about sovereign citizens could use this. Well, if you're not from here, we can boot you out. So if you know that's the thing with sovereign citizens, fine, we're kicking you out. You can't come in anymore. You're a stateless
I'm fine with that
refugee.
too. Let's deport all the
So
sovereign
they
citizens. I'm
it
perfectly
wouldn't be
happy.
well for them if they
Send them
if they
to
really wanted
Australia.
try that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I want to tip my cap to the Trump team also. They were very
Mhm.
clever in what they did because they're not stripping a single human being of their citizenship
Nope.
status. Arguably, no one has standing
Mhm.
to even raise this issue yet because it would only
Mhm.
apply the law, the EO that he put in there only applies and says any child who's born 30 days after the CEO, so no human on the planet yet,
Mhm.
is not going to have conferred upon them American
Yes.
citazenship status. So
I-
one can argue that these 22 states who are coming forward here. I mean, I don't like the standing argument, but if you're going to raise a standing argument or a
Yeah.
rightness argument, this is not right. We don't
Well,
know.
hold-
For all
hold
you
on,
know,
Joe.
no humans will be born 30 who are of this class 30
So that
days from
means-
now.
No.
Joe, there is standing. There's obviously standing for what they call it's
Why?
inevitable
who?
inevitable enforcement that
Yeah.
gives standing to any law. So yeah, so you're missing the inevitable enforcement. If the law
I've
is
never
going,
heard, I've never
There's a
seen
whole
that apply.
body
Tell
of-
me what you're
there-
talking about here.
there's a whole
I mean,
body
I think
of,
that makes
all right,
sense
so
to say that.
there's a whole body of law that says you don't have to wait to be harmed by the law before you can act. If it's inevitable, the law is going to go into place. So it's
You, but who? Who's the one who's going to
So
be
the
harmed?
There's
state-
a ton
the
of pregnant
states-
women
so
about
the-
to have a
so
kid.
the states are saying
You don't know if she's
because-
going to give birth to a living child.
What's standing
let me-
to
let me-
The
let me-
states are
let
trying
me-
to use.
let me-
That's why
in
Roe
Eritrea for
wasn't. I
standing.
mean,
let me
that's why
finish.
states allow abortion. You don't know the kid's going to be
So-
born.
So what happens is that since this is going to be enforced inevitably, the courts say you have standing to challenge this law because it will negatively affect you at this time. So it's the doctrine of inevitable enforcement. It will
I would
accordingly be
also be
It's not
slightly
going to affect
cautious
you.
with the
Who is it going
language.
to affect?
I'd be slightly cautious with the language in the EO that says this isn't supposed to be retroactive because, of course, we're talking about constitutional language.
Yes.
And the Constitution either grants citizenship or it doesn't. So I'm not sure that Trump can just say this doesn't have retroactive effect, because if the proper interpretation of the Constitution is that that it doesn't apply, then it never applied. So arguably, I don't think that Trump can just magically make it not retroactive.
What he's saying is the federal government will not recognize them as American citizens, any child born 30 days from now. That's what
Yeah,
he.
but how about the
he's
people?
saying.
That's
So they're
what
not
I'm
gonna
saying.
get
But how about the
security
people
number,
before that? Because
they're not
you
going
go to
to
the
be
U.S.
American
Supreme Court.
passports.
Just imagine you go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court says, you know what, you're right. The 14th Amendment says that people that are born of illegal aliens are not citizens. That's what the 14th Amendment means. How does that not have retroactive effect? How does that not have effect to people who have been born for the last 150 years?
Well,
I think it's because we've already given them citizenship. Like it doesn't undo.
Well, this is what Joe was
given to
saying
them,
earlier,
so-
right? This is the difference between what we think the law has been and what the law really is, because we have thought apparently that the children of illegal aliens were citizens. Joe's whole point is, no, that's wrong. That's just the way we've been interpreting
I agree.
it. That's an improper interpretation.
But
So it's
Danny's
like, okay,
correct.
but if that's true, then it's also the fact that we've been treating them as citizens is wrong too.
Okay,
and so that shouldn't be given effect either.
But Danny's
Right,
point
but
is,
it doesn't change the fact that they already have citizenship. What's done is done. We can't go back and
it's much like the DACA thing.
I agree with
Right,
you
like
on that.
so let's say the Supreme Court was to go the opposite way on Roe v. Wade. Okay, we can't go back and birth babies. Okay, that are already, we can't unbirth babies. You can't go and murder people.
That's true. That remedy is not possible, but we could at least in principle. We could at least in principle go citizenship, go poof.
Okay,
I
but
don't know if there's a legal mechanism to strip somebody of their citizenship.
Strictly speaking, you wouldn't be stripping them of their citizenship. You'd be saying they never were citizens in the first place.
There is a legal. Hold on. There is a legal mechanism to strip someone of their citizenship. However, just like you can't go and murder the babies that you wanted to abort, right? Pro Roe v. Wade or post, Dobbs, whatever the situation. What's done is done. That's why we're not going back and changing what's been done by interpreting the law correctly moving forward.
Yes.
And it may not be right. Listen, if you guys disagree with me and Joe and you're like, well, that's not fair and that's not right, I don't know what to say. The law is not always fair. The law is not always right.
Well,
and we can always
there are adverse consequences.
We can always work together to change the interpretation, to change the actual amendment if we don't like it.
Let me be clear. I do think the reasonable interpretation is that illegal aliens shouldn't just be able to come across the border, have a baby, and that baby is a citizen. I think that's ridiculous. But I'm, just as someone who been studying this, this stuff from law, it seems like it's going to be a very, very unlikely scenario that this rule is changed.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah,
I agree, because it's so firmly entrenched.
Yeah.
I think it's a flawed application that we've had for so many decades that it almost becomes that this is just what we agree is the way we're going to do things.
It'd be like trying to reverse the slaughterhouse cases.
Yeah, I have a solution.
Decided.
Don't allow.
It's like, how do you reverse all that?
The country.
However, even if that does happen, there's nothing stopping Trump from saying to the parents, okay, you have a baby here. When that baby's 18, they can come here, but they have no legal parent or guardian, and you're going. So
that's a whole.
So you're going, and you
have
can
to go
take
back.
your American citizen child, and if they decide to come here in 18 years, we'll deal with it then, and they can, get their American citizenship at that point. But that baby's not an anchor tying the parents, the abuela, and every other person who ever heard of this child as being some sort of basis for them to stay here in this country if they themselves are not individual.
That's a different
American
issue.
Citizens. That's how I expect it to play out in the long term. I agree with you guys that the chances are very high the Supreme Court is going to reject this EO as being constitutional. But that doesn't. But at least it's worth trying. You don't know until you try.
Right.
And no, I agree, Joe. It's just the judge says, well, it's wrong because it's wrong. He's not saying, oh, that was his basic argument. Well, it's just wrong. We've always done it this way. That's not an actual constitutional argument to it.
Yeah.
But that's what the courts are going to do probably here.
Unfortunately.
And the other person though that did a lot of scholarship on this is John Eastman, the attorney that was working in the Trump campaign the first time around. So if you guys want to read about it, not just Amy Swear, she's on Twitter. She's an attorney. She's not a law student anymore.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. But no, John Eastman did a lot. He's done a lot of work on this. If you guys want to read about it.
I'm going to read about it. Thank you.
All right.
I have a question for the
about
panel.
immigrants in Norway and
And I share with you all in the private link there, the link to the Amy Swearer thing, if you wanted to click it and check for yourselves.
I don't have access to the private chat.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
No, I don't. For some reason, I'll take a screenshot, show you what I'm sharing. I wasn't going to mention it.
It should just say under bottom right, 8 people.
Yeah.
That's the new private chat.
I'll send it
They
Oh.
changed the style.
I do. I'm just dumb. Thank you.
All right, so let's shift up back to my favorite thing, which is LBL topics, and this should be a nice one here. Let's discuss when force against police is legal. And I figure that one should get some action. And that is from MAGA Goals.
I'm not touching this.
It all
Yeah,
depends
that
on
sounds,
it really
that
on
sounds like a nightmare.
it all depends on what state you're in. Because I know, for instance, like in New York, even if the arrest is unlawful, you can't resist arrest or you'll be charged. But then I know in other states where if the arrest is unlawful, you can fight against the police to stay free. So it really, so it's a cadre of different perspectives.
Here's the thing. There may be a law that says you can do it, but generally speaking, if the police are arresting you, you're not going to kick enough of their asses. They're going to decide, okay, we're not going to arrest you. They will kill you if they have to. And then if it turns out they're wrong, they'll go, oh, well, sorry. So you're going to, you got to take your pinch like a man is pretty much how it's going to go. Now, if you're sitting there at Starbucks and the cop just comes out of nowhere and starts attacking you, okay, fine, sure. But generally speaking, my advice to you is if you try to fight him with an arrest, regardless of whether or not it's a legitimate arrest, you're going to have a lot of problems.
I think
that's wise.
The only
biggest time this
would
come up is
the only times you ever have like a legitimate using force against people is you're at home and they kick in your door. They don't say who they are, and you grab a gun and you start throwing copper at the people who came in your house, and they identify themselves as cops. That does happen, and people have successfully defeated charges against that. But otherwise, you really don't. I don't recommend fighting the police because they'll kill you, and then they'll say, "Sorry, we thought we were doing the right thing." Oops.
There's a huge famous case where this happened. Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, when the police knocked on the door, he started shooting at police. They shot and killed her. Well, they arrested him, and they not only released him, but also he was able to sue the police department because he was able to defend his house because he said he didn't hear the police, but he was able to defend his home. So yes, in that particular case, you can defend your home from the police.
So a stand your ground type of scenario.
Yes.
Yeah, because I didn't know they were the cops. I thought they were just, dudes breaking in, which doesn't happen.
There was a Canada case too recently, right? Where unmarked police were shooting at somebody and then they got in a firefight with them over it, and I think they won or something happened. If Ian was here, I'm sure that he would tell us about that.
A lot of times there's mistaken identity is an issue, and that's kind of a separate thing than if the cops arrest you and you feel it's wrong. Like if you're sitting there and you're just reading a book and a cop tries to arrest you, well, yeah, you haven't broken the law. That's a wrongful arrest. But a lot of the times when people think of resisting law enforcement, it's generally like a mistaken identity thing.
Okay, so the next topic suggestion from Garbage at Retired Elon, saying if Ricardo's sober, I would like to see an appearance. Nick has gotten invites to come on. He's got things going on, and I believe he may have a hearing today.
Yeah, he's a little busy at the moment.
So I don't know if there's any update or anybody knows. I guess he has a hearing today.
I think he's pleading guilty, right? He's pleading guilty.
Yep.
To charges.
That was supposed to happen 10:45, I think, this morning.
We don't know. Let's say we'll find out what it is because we actually have no idea at this point. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, so I did want to acknowledge it, but there you go. And now I won't be able to always get every question. Somebody put in a Credit Suisse cleanup continues in New Zealand and circles back to Delaware, and talking about corporate recklessness. This is probably a little outside of our bailiwicks. I don't know. But again, we do deeply appreciate that. And I see that new topics are coming in already for next week. And that is awesome. I do appreciate it. I'll bring up one last subject. I think it's actually.
It looks like there was a guilty plea. They got sentencing scheduled in April now. So.
Oh, okay.
In April or in April?
So it wasn't a plea deal?
No, well, it is a plea deal, but they still are going to do a pre-sentencing, whatever, and do an actual sentencing in April.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, a lot of people are interested in this topic. I think on the panel, Danny just shut her camera off, but I think she's one of them. Some of the big news yesterday, and I think it's almost premature for everybody to start celebrating and dancing, is Donald Trump signed an executive order to release all of the JFK, RFK, MLK files. However, to be really specific, he said for the
DNI.
In 15 days,
DNI,
give me a
okay.
plan. Give me a plan.
give me a plan, and the plan could be to never release them. The plan could be to kick it down the can for a while. And two, is this 15 days after being confirmed? Because Tulsi Gabbard hasn't been confirmed yet. Isn't she the DNI? And
So-
if
There's
she
an
hasn't
acting
been
DNI.
confirmed, so is
So-
it 15 after her confirmation? No, I'm asking. There's some
Potentially criminal
real
very cute.
problem.
John's
This
got
is
a
what's going to
preview.
happen regardless.
So I actually kind of disagree, if I may, because if you read the entire EO, because that was the first thing I thought was, oh, okay, this is going to be heavily redacted, if anything at all, right? This is going to be the same thing he did back in 2017. And we did get some disclosures there, especially on the MLK documents. I think that was that 2016 or 17?
It would have been 17.
Okay. So we did get some disclosure, but we certainly didn't get enough. And what he says in the EO is, at the time when I considered this, it was brought to my attention, or I was advised that we shouldn't release these things. And so we continued. I set up a committee, they researched it, and I was told again that we shouldn't release these things and that everything should be redacted. And I kept the redactions in, and I kept the redactions in. And then during the Biden campaign, there were no releases whatsoever. And so where he's saying
that's not true. Biden did release a lot of documents. He did.
right, but that was sort of the intent of the EO. So if you read through the intent of the EO, he basically makes it clear that Biden really didn't do a lot. There wasn't, a ton of redaction, or there were more redactions, or the redactions stayed in place. I now want to remove those redactions. I'll find the exact language for you. But my hope, and this is what I get for being an optimist, my hope is that we do get some unredacted material, or
I'm sure
a
that
significant
some will
portion.
come out, but what I'm trying to say is that everybody shouldn't be dancing in the street saying everything's no, it's not. I can tell you already, Ruth Payne is alive. Her documents are sealed. They're not coming out. That's part of the JFK Assassinations Act, the law that was put in place.
Here's the exact language, and this is what makes me optimistic. I have now determined that the continued redaction and withholding of information from records pertaining to the assassination of President JFK is not consistent with the public interest, and the release of these records is long overdue. So you guys are all probably right. Probably not. Even if it comes out, I'm more likely to believe that things go missing in the next 45 days.
We had a fire. Whoops.
Well,
Yeah,
they could have been missing already. I mean, come on. They found a box over at a CIA headquarters that is like, oh, look at these documents. Oh, geez, this whole JFK, so it's already happening. and there's a lot that I'm sure that has been misplaced. They're doing the Raiders of the Lost Ark treatment, I'm sure, as well. Like, every warehouse, there's random boxes.
Top men. Top men.
So I'm hoping that it's redactions over just missing, because, like the moon landing film, we don't have that. It's missing. It was just destroyed magically and just went missing. So it would be nice if we could keep the actual records and just keep them redacted. So at some point in American history, there could be some justice had.
I have a sneaking suspicion no matter what gets released, it won't satiate anybody.
That's true.
It's gonna be a nothing burger in the end.
Well, and not only that, the part that's already giving me a headache is all the newly released documents that people are already spitting out there when this hasn't even happened. And they're all, the grift is on, folks. You're going to get everything. We've got the wormed over. The driver shot him again. That's one of the worst of all time that's been floated out there. And, it gets us views, but I'm telling you, with AUS, it is such a headache. And of course, I've already got the 1,000 inputs of, did you know? Yeah, I know he signed it. I know. Anyway, it's going to be a very interesting time for upcoming weeks with the onslaught of grifting, documents, this theory, that supposed there will be documents that have already been released.
I'll start working on my clickbait titles. Shocking JFK information released.
Oh yeah. I'm encouraged, and I think about like MK Ultra was discovered even after the documents were burned. Why? Well, because there was some
While they were
accounting
burning.
information. No, it was a different area because they tracked expenses, and that's what revealed the operation. So there's possibility, and the guys who are doing the JFK research are so sharp. They really know a lot of these facts, and they could read between the lines, even redacted information. Like they redacted H.L. Hunt name from documents, right? But they said in the documents that it was a person who's an author of like 30 books. Well, guess how many CIA officers had authored 30 books? One guy. So there's other information that a lot of the
It's hard to do
assassination
it.
experts know to look for. You. They can also cross-tabulate and say, okay, well, who was stationed in these 3 locations that are mentioned during this time span? Bang, bang, bang. I also think AI is going to be very, very powerful. Somebody who's building actually the LBL topics with me on this, doing most of the work for me, is someone called Encryptus, who also does a lot of work with Viva Fry. And Encryptus is, guess what? Right now, building an entire AI storehouse for the entire JFK assassination records.
That's
So
awesome.
that's going to be some fun
That's
stuff.
awesome.
He's building it now. It's going to take literally weeks and weeks to get them in. There's millions. There's other problems like the PDFs are not readable all the time. So again, it's going to take time, but it'll be nice to have a baseline, and then you can start comparing to what's coming in new. And AI doesn't sleep. It doesn't get exhausted. It doesn't do a lot of things. Now, it's not perfect, but it can sure point down the right paths. And he's built it in a manner where he's actually doing citations of said documents. So it's not just hey, did such and such say such and such? It'll say, yes, they said this to this, and it's in this document. So then you can go and actually confirm the document, which I love. And it's also sandboxed, so it's not connected to the internet, and a few less hallucinations. So exciting.
It's very cool. That's very, very cool.
All right. So what else did we have? Did I?
Pardon?
Are we not going to talk about
pardons?
pardons?
Yeah, pardons.
Blanket
Last
pardons?
subject.
Oh,
That
I
should
have
have no problems at all. No contentious.
I have a suggestion about blanket pardons. There should be a trial anyways, or at least an investigation. Just because they can't be sentenced doesn't mean they can't perform an actual trial, in my opinion.
Well, that's what Congress is for. I mean,
Yeah,
like the whole
Congress can
Biden family
investigate.
could be
They
called
can
in front of
still
Congress.
investigate.
Congress. No, not Congress. I want to see a jury impaneled. I want to hear that jury say guilty, 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 guilty. Anthony Fauci, is he responsible for the genesis of certain pandemics? I want to hear a jury say guilty for the deaths of potentially millions of people. Guilty, 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 guilty. Millie, are there 13 dead servicemen because of your utter incompetence? Guilty, guilty, guilty. I want to see that guy court-martialed because I don't think a pardon works for that. I don't think these blanket pardons, frankly, are legal at all. I think that when it goes up to the Supreme Court, just because we've been recognizing them as being legal doesn't mean that they actually are legal. Because part of a pardon, as said in Burdick versus the United States back in 1915, is that you are accepting guilt for your crime.
That's not what Burdick says. That's not what Burdick says. That's not what Burdick says.
Joe, stop. That's
That's not what
inaccurate.
Burdick says.
Somebody
That's
stop.
not what
agree,
Burdick
Joe.
says.
That Ford gave a blanket pardon to Nixon, and that stopped prosecutors going after them. We didn't prosecute the BLM rioters either. Does that mean that they're all innocent?
Hey,
also?
Joe,
That's
stop for
ridiculous.
1 second. Stop for
No,
1 second.
no, he's
Hold on. Using your same logic, Joe, then you're saying that the January 6th pardons for those who have not been tried yet have to be thrown out, correct?
What?
I know
No.
I'm using your exact logic. No, those are preemptive pardons for people who have not been charged. The charges keep rolling in, and they've been blanket pardons for January 6ers, except for the few commutations. So
No.
I can use your exact same logic,
No,
which I'm sure most
because
people
they've been
support.
charged.
No,
They've been
there's some have
charged.
some have not been charged. though.
Some
There's
have not been
have
charged. The charges are rolling all the way
Yeah, there
till
was some that
January
haven't been
19th.
charged.
I know lawyers who've done that.
Well, Eric,
Fine,
as
I'll
far
tell you
as the
something.
charges, there's 3 separate groups with the January 6 people. A bunch of people got commutations, like Stuart Rhodes, and then a bunch of the Proud Boys.
I agree.
Everybody who had already been convicted got a full pardon.
Mhm.
If you hadn't been convicted, if you were still awaiting trial, so there's people who were awaiting trial, and the DOJ was ordered to dismiss those cases with prejudice. So if you had just been still awaiting trial, you didn't get a pardon. It's just the DOJ said we're completely throwing the case out. We're never coming back to it. So there were like 3 separate groups of people. If you
Sean.
were awaiting trial, you didn't get a pardon. So there's a bit of a
Sean, and to the
there's
panel,
separate
do you guys
classes.
think you should have to plead guilty or at least
No. The
Or at
pardon's a
least-
pardon.
or-
The imputation of guilt is the Supreme Court acknowledging, yes, if you take a pardon, everybody thinks you're guilty as hell. It's not them saying you have to be.
That's not what verdict versus United
That's
States
what it said. The imputation
I
of
was
guilt, it
just reading
carries
it
with it an
yesterday on
imputation.
screen. That's not what it says. It says there's an imputation of
Yes,
guilt.
but
What is that?
they're musing about why Burdick didn't want and was talking about his whole issue of being pardoned. He didn't want to get pardoned because, oh my God, everybody thinks I'm a bad guy.
Why do they
Burdick
say
was
that
about the
Fifth Amendment-
pardon versus immunity.
in the same case, they say that someone pleading the fifth is not an imputation of guilt. How do you have a distinction if it's not? If it's not, the public might think it is. If you're
Yeah,
telling
and that's
me
what
that
that's
it's
what
the
they were
public thinks
addressing in
argument.
Burdick.
If
I
you're telling
think
me
it's
it's
about
only
how
about what the
society
public thinks,
views
why
it.
would the public not think that about the Fifth Amendment?
Because
I have-
people are fucking stupid.
I have
Joe.
a question.
That's
Sean?
not. I don't think they're making it. I think that I would assume the Supreme Court in Burdick versus United States is making a legal distinction, not weighing in on cultural zeitgeist of the day as to which one is.
They totally
considered
were,
to be
though.
guilty.
Danny, go ahead.
Question.
Yeah, go for it.
If you're presumed innocent,
Mhm.
you're not guilty of a crime.
Mhm.
So how does a pardon have legal effect if you're already innocent? Is it just preemptively saying you
The
remain
pardon's a
innocent?
political power. This
Of
person
criminal-
should not be. This person should not be punished. Like whatever you're accused of doing. The president saying, "I wipe it clean." I mean, the pardon is a political power. The king, I forgive you. You're absolved from any problems, whatever they are.
But aren't you presumed to not have any problems?
Yeah, that's
no,
fine. But that's
under the law.
no. Just look at the soldiers in the Civil
Yeah.
War, right? They were pardoned, and the reason why they were pardoned, not because they violated a crime or committed treason, they were clearly guilty of that. They were pardoned so that the country could heal and move forward. So it's not for the innocent, it's not for the guilty, it's for a political purpose, like Sean is saying. And whatever that political purpose is, they have the power to do it. It doesn't mean guilt or innocence, and it shouldn't be implied one way or the other either.
Sure.
But
And
people
sure.
will think
But
people think.
But hold on. In that case, that's something that's happened. The actor has
Yeah.
done something.
well,
My
okay, but
question
Danny,
is with
so
preemptive pardons,
yeah.
how
they're
does
not-
that make sense
Oh, I think-
legally?
Danny, I think there's a difference between preemptive pardons for past actions versus
Right.
preemptive pardons for future actions.
Why?
Mhm.
Why?
So-
Should that- Why?
Because I can't pardon you for
Because
something
if it's
that
if
you
it's
haven't
in the
done
future,
in the
it's not an
future.
offense.
I can only
Yeah.
pardon you for things you've
Why?
done in the past.
Why
No, the
not?
thing-
Why can
Because
you not?
It's
All
like
right,
saying
so-
I'm going to
Joe-
rob a bank tomorrow. It hasn't
Joe,
happened yet.
I can
yeah.
only
But why
pardon
can I
you
not?
for-
Why can Trump not say whoever murders X in the next 30 days, I will pardon them?
Right.
Well, he
I-
can't
they're
say.
considered
No, hold on. He
they're
can
considered
say
part
that,
of-
but he
They're considered
can't
part of
pardon
them
him until
today
after it
forward.
happens.
They're
Well,
considered
hold on.
part
He
of
can't do it until it
pardon.
happens. So,
Why
Joe.
can't
Hold
I
on,
do
hold on,
that?
Joe.
Joe, he could actually do that.
There
And he could
is a-
say, if you murdered somebody, I will pardon you.
I don't think.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think
no,
he
that's
could.
the
I will pardon you.
position
No,
is
I
Why
you
can't he?
You're pardoned as
preemptively
of today.
pardon
Joe,
in the
Yeah,
future.
pardon
too.
in advance.
The Supreme Court has already ruled that the pardon looks back. It doesn't look
Now,
forward.
In Ray Garland says that basically the offense has to have already
Yes,
occurred.
the offense
Mhm.
has to
Yeah,
already
the
have
act
occurred.
has
The
to have
language I
occurred,
sent to you,
not the
in a-
conviction
in a
or the
te- in a
charge.
text
By
message.
the way,
correct.
Joe, Joe,
And-
your
and-
logic
and
falls
we're not-
apart
and we're
in
not-
your own statement.
and
Hold
we're
on,
not
your
looking-
logic falls apart in your own statement because he could say that all he wants. He could say, "I can pardon you for this," but he hasn't pardoned them yet. So when they commit the act,
okay.
they're still going to be
amended
locked
it,
up.
though. But Eric, I amended. I said, and I agree with you, by the way. I agree with the logic that you're saying. My point is there are limits to the pardon power. That I
Yes.
was
only
asking
affects
that
the
as a
past.
rhetorical question.
That's a
The
limitation.
same way we say I cannot pardon someone. Say I pardon you now for any crime you commit in the next 10 years. That you can't say I'm pardoning you for any crime you've committed for the past 10 years. When
But
I
those
don't
are-
know what
those
those
don't
crimes
make
are.
sense.
Things. Those
I
are
have
two
no
different
way
things.
of knowing.
Those
How
are
can
two different
pardon
You have
things.
to go to In Ray Garland.
Pardon
and
me.
Yeah,
say,
you have to
"Well,
go to in right because Joe, you're
Pardon
arguing
me.
against us. You're arguing against the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, you are. You're arguing against.
No,
the Supreme Court.
I
Joe,
agree
if I
with
rob
you.
a bank and you didn't charge me for it, and the government doesn't know I did it,
Joe's
so they
right
commit a
that there
crime.
are issues that haven't been brought before the Supreme Court regarding the
Mhm.
boundaries of the pardoning power. And within the amendment itself, it does put some restrictions on the pardoning power. So
But this has been
identifying
Okay,
and
question.
limit-
I've
Yeah.
got an example that maybe can explain some of the between the lines in my head. And I admit I'm not the lawyer here. But okay, let's say somebody, 3 people are convicted of a bank robbery that took place 5 years ago, whatever it is. And then they've gotten a pardon for it. Now, the blanket pardon could be to prevent from other things happening. Because what if I said, oh, you know what? Okay, you're pardoned for the bank robbery, but now I got you on conspiracy. And I'm going to go find this other fact. So as a blanket pardon saying, I don't know everything that could be tied in with what they did, but I want this to be a blanket pardon that they are not convicted of these crimes. Am I completely
I
off?
agree.
my rocker on that?
You're asking a great question, Eric. And to me,
Yeah.
it makes sense. To me, it makes sense to say, I am pardoning you for any steps that you took in with respect to the Watergate scandal, Nixon. That Ford had a power to do. I don't think Ford had a power to say, I'm pardoning you for any crime you've ever committed in the last 10 years when I have absolutely no idea whatsoever what possible activity you've conducted in the last 10 years. Pardon means we're recognizing that you've committed a sin and that we're not going to give you any punishment for that sin. That's what it is. If the king himself, and even if we gave him conferred upon the president the powers of a king, if a king himself is the one who's giving it, the king has to know what he's pardoning. He doesn't know if no one knows whether Anthony Fauci, but it doesn't make any sense.
Why can't I?
Because you're pardoning the action.
I forgive you for everything.
I don't
Joe,
think
even if I
that
don't know
requires
about
it.
it.
If you know you
I can
don't
forgive you
know,
for
then you're
things I
just
don't know.
choosing to do that. You can do that like in contract law all the time.
Yeah.
As long as you're aware that you don't know things,
Are you
then
now
you
comparing
can't use your
but
own
can I-
ignorance
can I-
because you're aware of your ignorance.
Well, let me just to be clear,
To
a
contract law?
pardon technically is just
Yeah.
divesting the jurisdiction of the United States from those crimes. So you can't. So it's divesting jurisdiction. You can't do that going forward. You
Well,
can
those of
only
you who
do
are
that
interested
doing
could
going
read the
back.
text on screen. We'll move
Yeah.
on.
But yes, you're divesting jurisdiction from the courts to
Do you
prosecute
have a link you want
for
to share?
this thing.
Share the
I'm
link.
sharing it on screen for the last 30
Yeah, he-
seconds.
he
So no one
shared-
I
cares.
want
Yes.
to. I'm not sitting here reading your screen.
He wants it
we
in the
can't
chat.
read and
I
talk.
want in the
Yeah,
chat.
can you make it big?
Just give me the link. I'll look at it.
It's a lot of words. Too bad I can't read.
I don't. You see here.
No, I'm just saying for me.
I learned
I
from
don't wanna read.
legacy. I learned from watching Legacy Media
There
that
you
I'm not going to read a clip.
There's your
Give
link.
me the link, and I'll go through.
I got
the
your
whole
link. It's in your PM.
Okay, guys.
Perfect.
All right. Ex parte Garland, 1866. The power of pardon conferred by the Constitution upon the president is unlimited except in case of impeachment. It extends to every offense known to law and may be exercised at any time after its commission,
Okay.
either before legal proceedings are taken or during their proceedings or after conviction and judgment.
And how and what are you pardoning though? It doesn't say that the
Any
it doesn't say that
offense.
the president. It doesn't.
Known to the
Any
law.
offense.
Known to the
Any
law.
offense
Yeah,
known to
it's,
the
it
law.
can, that, but that doesn't mean that the person who's pardoning doesn't need to know what offenses he's.
But you don't
I
know what
pardon
you're
you
going to be
pardon you
charged
for
with, Joe.
but so Judge, I can pardon you for every offense. I pardon you for everything.
And when
Yeah.
I
There it
read
is.
this, I read no,
Mhm.
because I read every offense there, meaning there's no offense that he's hamstrung from pardoning. If he knows of that part, if he knows he committed murder, genocide, torturing beagles by throwing sandflies in their eyes, he still has the power,
Joe-
if he knows of it,
Ed,
Joe,
to
why
pardon
can't-
for that heinous offense.
Joe,
So why
hold
can't
on.
he pardon for
Supporting
everything?
perjury before
Every
the
single
thing.
crime.
What?
I don't
Why
mind
don't- I-
them being pardoned of every single crime, but I do think that the president should have to specify at least a genre of crimes.
Yes.
So I don't think that the pardoning.
Maybe I want to
part says,
forgive him for every crime.
I'm
though.
going to make you. Well, then you have to specify that, and
Then I have to
do-
say any crime under the United States Code.
correct.
Yes,
I
there it
think
is.
that that's the correct answer. I think that it puts more accountability
becomes a
because if
blanket
we're saying
pardon.
this is a political power, right?
Mhm.
Then we should have a political check on it. And I think that's the political check is Joe Biden pardoned Anthony Fauci for
Mhm.
any and all
Well,
crimes
is a check
committed
on him.
between this
there is a
state
political
and this
check.
state.
There's
That's
a
what
political
he said.
check. He could be impeached.
So
Now, I
If
think
we had a
Fauci's-
problem with it, we could impeach him.
yeah,
I
but
am
if
curious.
it's
Fauci
how,
Good on the way out the door.
Someone asked the question yesterday
At
that
the last
I'm not
minute.
sure of the legal
Yeah.
answer to. I'd love to get the panel's take on this. Can Millie be court-martialed?
No,
No.
So court-martialed is part of
because
it.
he was his
any
pardon
offense-
includes the
any
UCMJ.
offense-
Hold on. There's a limit on impeachment.
Mhm.
So for purposes of removing him from the army, that there's a court martial. He can't be imprisoned as a result of that. That he's pardoned from facing criminal jail time, but that he can be stripped of his commission. That these are civil penalties, and removed and dishonorably discharged. I think those are not criminal penalties, and I think that I think you make an argument that he could be court-martialed.
I don't know on that.
It's interesting. I don't know.
The
enough.
president just
and
have
it's
the
also
power to like remove
subservient.
generals at will without
One at
it
a
being
time,
I
Jennifer.
really hope that this
Yeah,
is
I don't know about
challenged,
that.
and I really hope that they put some boundaries on it from
They
a
can't.
political and a
can't.
policy
There's no
perspective.
there's no
here.
boundaries on it.
Yeah, there's never been any boundaries.
As of
the
eight-
instruction
yeah.
manual says don't do this, and that's it.
Sure. Sure. However, the
Which-
instruction manual has said explicitly a lot of things, and it's been interpreted a
yeah.
lot of ways.
That's
Mhm.
true.
So my point is I hope that we get clarity on this. I hope that it is limited to a certain extent. Not every extent. I'm not asking for a lot, but at least the president should have to mention this is exactly what I'm pardoning
I'm
them
just glad
for.
right now we're not doing this in person, so a fist fight didn't break out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, while we're calming down, let's go and I'm going to wrap things up with Kurt and say, Kurt, what do you have coming up?
Well, my friends, we will be continuing with our coverage of Supreme Court cases as they develop. I did one that was came down like 2 or 3 days ago, which was pretty interesting. It was a merits decision without oral argument. The Supreme Court granted cert and then just like, here's your decision. It was pretty interesting dealing with whether or not it's possible for evidence to be so inflammatory that it would comprise a due process violation. And the Supreme Court's just like, yes, it is. Go away. It's just was kind of funny and humorous in its way. Also, of course, I'll be covering other cases as they develop, and just probably trying to break down some more of this stuff. I was doing the citizenship case, the Kim Van Ark or whatever the name is. I was doing a read of that on my channel recently, so I'll probably be trying to get more into that and trying to figure out exactly what I think on the issue of birthright citizenship. It's going to be interesting as we try to break it down. So tune in for that.
All right. Danny, what do you have going on?
I'm doing Karen Reed. I'm doing, because they just filed a motion recently that should be really interesting to discuss. So I'm covering Karen Reed. I'm covering Corey Richins, the woman who poisoned her husband and then published a book about, how to live on without your daddy, allegedly. And then I'm covering the case out here in Utah that just happened. The founder of New Skin, she passed away, in my opinion, of mysterious natural causes. Well, her daughter was just murdered recently. So I'm going to be covering that case, along with a bunch of other criminal cases and a few civil ones. I'm doing Blake Lively. So if you guys want to watch that ship go down in tremendous fashion, please tune in, because it's been a lot of fun so far. Not fun, obviously, for her victim, but lots of fun for us to laugh at her. I love to point and laugh once in a while where it's warranted.
Sounds like another Amber Heard.
Well, that statement right there tells me which side Danny's on.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm definitely developed a side. No, I'm always open with my biases on my channel. If I have a bias, I'll tell you exactly which one it is. And shout out to Joe, Good Logic, for really bringing the good logic today and fighting the good fight.
Sean, what do you have going on?
This afternoon, Ashley Benefield, she just had a hearing about trying to get appeal bond in her murder case. We're gonna look at that today, and then we were going to try this weekend. Hopefully, I can get in touch with Matt LaRosier, Guy Fudbusters, to talk about some developments in his lawsuit against Cody Wilson regarding the copyright issues with 3D printed gun files. So hopefully we could do that this weekend. So I'm going to try to work on setting that up.
All right. And Dave, what's going on?
Next Friday, the 31st, we have Jennifer Crumbley hearing. I'm going to be streaming that. That's 9 a.m. Eastern. And that's about all I have coming up. But if you're interested in Jennifer Crumbley, check it out.
Okay. By the way, folks, his channel name has changed up. I came to find out it's now MLS Law. Okay. Yeah.
Making Law.
Just read his, I like that much better than God of Law, by the way. Much better.
Yeah. Thanks.
God of anything just feels kind of like Really?
It was a placeholder.
I understand. I understand. Nick, what do you have going on?
Well, I have an exclusive interview with the attorney in the CNN defamation trial, Mr. Friedman, at 7 p.m. tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard tomorrow, Saturday. And it will be really interesting to pick his brain about how he got through to discovery, through discovery, to trial, and then a multi-million-dollar settlement for Mr. Young. Besides that, in 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about the new evidence revealed in the Delphi case against Richard Allen. I knew it was bad. I had no idea it was this bad. How much misconduct from the prosecution and Judge Gall. What has been
You're talking the
revealed?
Delphi murders?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
That's a whole bucket of bull crap.
what an absolute. Yeah. And I'm going to go through some of it because now when the trial is over, Richard Allen is convicted. Now Judge Gall can't stop the floodgates being opened. Exactly what she denied the defense bringing to the jury. What kind of evidence she suppressed. And what evidence the prosecution withheld from the defense. It is absolutely mind-boggling that this can go on in the United States today. So yeah, that in 20 minutes.
All right, real quick super chat that came in. Technically, I'm sure that's probably true. If a kid becomes a citizen because they're born here by law, then yes, they'd be subject to selective service agreement, I believe.
If it's a boy.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, it's a boy, of course. Yeah.
Feminists, shut up and stop trying to put me in war. You do not want me in war. You want me making beautiful citizens and babies to send to war.
All right, Nate, what do you have going on?
I got the next video about these pardons, how I disagree with both the pardons for the January 6th and Biden's pardons. I do think people like the shaman. I think he should have obviously been pardoned because he didn't. He was invited in and he was taken around like that guy should obviously be pardoned. That was ridiculous that he even had to plead guilty to all that. But I think people who bash police in the head through like there's one guy who literally threw a fire extinguisher and knocked one of the police's head. The cop lost his eye, one broke his arm. I think with that, I think those people should not have gotten pardoned. I think commutations would have been
but
fine.
they were commutations, Nate.
There were six commutations, but not from all the cop beaters. They got free. A lot of them got free reigns, and I called out some of my conservative friends because I called them abject super hypocrites, because when Black Lives Matter, we were all up here screaming, no, the cops, you can't do this to the cops, don't beat cops, we understand we're protesting, but then as soon as it comes to getting to the left, the cops are beating cops with sticks. It's like, oh, well, we should pardon them all because you know why? Because I'm just a super hypocrite and I don't really care when I talk about things like cops are fighting for us and all this.
How long are they supposed to be? How long are they supposed to be?
Let me finish, Joe. So I believe that if you have the nerve to say that Black Lives Matter people who are protesting, who are beating cops should be in prison, then I believe you should also think that the protesters who are beating cops should also be in prison and should also do their time. And I don't believe they should get full pardons. I think they should have been communed, but it is what it is, because I do understand, and I will say this at the end, I do understand that 95% of those Black Lives Matter protesters who did beat cops were let go. So that's why I really don't have a problem with the Trump pardons. But I just like to be consistent with my own personal morals and values. And if you beat cops at a protest, I think you should go to jail and be punished. But again, that's me as a crazy conservative.
Nate, I'm on your team. I would prefer commutations over pardons any day. Any day.
You guys want to explain the legal distinction for the audience between commutation and pardon? Because I think there's an assumption
in the case of a commutation.
One says we
the
have
conviction
no right to prosecute. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
One says we have no right to prosecute. We will not prosecute for the crimes alleged to have occurred between this and this time. Whatever act would have arisen to a crime, a criminal act against the United States, then we will not prosecute. Or even if we do, you won't be found guilty. That's my interpretation. You won't receive legal punishment,
or
criminal
if you,
punishment for it.
or if you have
that's
been
my
convicted.
understanding.
So if you've been convicted and you've been pardoned, none of the prohibitions apply to you anymore.
It's a clean slate.
It doesn't wipe your conviction, but you can own a gun, you can vote, you can have passports. You're basically all punishments and anything that affected you are wiped away clean. A commutation is just saying, good enough. You're still, what you did was bad.
Yeah,
We're
you're
just
still
not
a
going to make you
felon.
suffer anymore.
You're still a felon. It's as if your prison
Yeah.
sentence ended 20
Yes.
years early.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree that the cop beaters should not have been pardoned. They should have been commuted. They should have been released. They should have been commuted and released for time served.
I agree
That
with that.
that I can get on board with completely.
That's what that's what Nate's been saying, and I think that in fairness, that would seem appropriate because they did commit this crime. Their circumstances, fine, commute the sentence, then you're done. You're done. You're free. But the ones who really were nonviolent, walking around, I like to call them tourists because a lot of were literally tourists.
Literally
Like,
tourists.
oh, they
Yeah,
opened
shaman,
the
they
door.
walked around. They walked
and-
the shaman around and they charged him. That was ridiculous.
And what the ultimate issue, though, is, and we're seeing this now, it shows you how the way these judges have been acting in DC. They don't understand the concept. Like, today, Stuart Rhodes, the judge who sentenced him, issued an order saying you're not allowed in the Capitol building and I'm restricting you from entering the District of Columbia. Now, a judge could set geographical sanctions and limitations, but when the commutation, the sentence is over, there's no more authority.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Somebody brought this up, and I think I can address this. And you guys tell me if I'm wrong. What if they didn't have a fair trial? Well, that could be Bill Cosby's argument. Does that mean that we say that Bill Cosby is pardoned?
Sometimes that's the only way to fix the injustice. Yeah. Because if it wasn't a fair trial, it should have been an acquittal.
Yeah,
I mean, there's only so many ways you can fix the wrong there, because if it wasn't a fair trial, it shouldn't have happened.
But when we are talking about people who pleaded guilty and were caught on camera doing this, we're not.
Well, now in fairness,
like we are talking about a
there
lot
were
of
people who pled guilty, like Chansley, you just talked about. He pled guilty, the QAnon shaman, because he felt like he couldn't do anything.
But I'm saying if somebody's caught on camera, like I pulled up some of the pictures, like people who are caught on camera literally beating cops with sticks.
Yes.
And they plead guilty, then obviously I'm talking about commutation. And I agree with them being in jail for 4 years is ridiculous and all that stuff. I understand that, but that's my only big issue, because I see a lot of commentators saying, well, they should be all let go. And I'm like, my morals just won't allow me to go that far.
And I don't disagree with the moral arguments here, but at this point, the political issue of, well, this is the battlefield that's been set now. So it's like, morally, we're operating under a different framework at this point.
Agreed.
So,
all right. Well, I think it's going to be a contentious thing for a while.
But yes, these judges will not put the fries in the bag out in DC, and that's a big problem.
No.
That's because they're corrupt. That's why.
Yes.
Joe, what do you have coming up?
I have a vacation for the next week.
Ooh,
nice.
Congrats.
It's my first week-long vacation. I'm coming back a week from Monday. So my first week-long vacation since I started streaming 3 years ago. I'm very upset. The one thing I really, really, really want to watch that's coming up next week is the Cash Patel confirmation hearing. I think that's going to be electric. I'm so bummed about it. I may even watch it after the fact just because.
Well, you know what? It may not happen because they could kick the can like they did with Bondi. You never know.
Well, the confirmation hearing that Bondi had happened pretty quickly, and they scheduled this, I think, for the 29th or 30th of January, which is next week. If it does happen, I probably will end up watching it during a daytime stream the following week if anyone wants to watch it with me, because I'm going to be watching it anyway. I might as well watch it with people who might want to hear my comments on some of the fire I'm expecting to happen there from both sides, both the Senate and Cash Patel. But yeah, for the next week, there's no live streams for me. Those are viewers on my show. You're not going to get notifications from me. I will be doing a locals or two, like goodlogic.locals.com, and probably updating about my trip and other things. But I'm not going to be having my normal political /law /morality type of stream that I like to do every night. But after I come back, I'll kind of over. Good Logic on Rumble, YouTube.
All right. Well, wrapping it up. By the way, folks, if you like this kind of show, there's that red button down below, that subscribe button. Consider doing that. if you're interested in the JFK, RFK, I'm quite certain that we will be talking about it at least a bit tonight on America's Untold Stories, Freeform Friday. I am involved with a lot of the JFK type of stuff, but my partner on the show, Mark Robert, is one of the top experts on JFK out there. Co-wrote a 5-part miniseries with Oliver Stone. His bona fides are remarkable, and he knows a lot of what's going on, and there'll be a lot of nuance, and I'm sure he's digging into that. So it's America's Untold Stories. It'll be at 5:30 p.m. We do it every Friday. Also on America's Untold Stories, next Tuesday at 5:30 p.m., we will be doing the Marina Oswald episode. So going into her story, her past, very interesting character all around. So everybody, thank you so much.
Before you head off, Eric, shout out to Eric for having, like, what is it, 5 viral threads on Twitter. One getting like 8 million, the other one getting 5 million. He is killing it on Twitter. You got to check out Eric's threads because they are all hitting over 1 million views. So congratulations, Eric. You are making it happen, brother.
Thanks, man. And not all of them. Believe me, I had one thread that hit like 5,000 and the next thread that hit 3 million in the same day. Go figure. But everybody, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, all right. You're in my courtroom now, Buster. And let me tell you, there's so many of you here that are downright guilty of not subscribing to laid back law, yet watching full-blown episodes. Why don't you get your life together and just hit that button already? We all know you need it.